Let's move to our last item of the day, F7, cost of living adjustments for retirees. Go ahead.
All right, Mr. Chair, shall I go ahead and start?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would move this item.
I would prefer to have some conversation before we do that, if you don't mind.
All right, well,
That's
good
fine.
afternoon.
After the conversation.
Quickly, of course, I'm joined by with Cheryl and Nathan, and on the line also we have John Monroe, who runs our actuarial services group, as well as Paul Angelo from Siegel, who is the Regents actuary. So I'll just do this briefly. Chair Cohen, the item F8 is an action item regarding a recommended amendment to the University of California Retirement Plan, UCRP. The amendment would provide for a one-time ad hoc cost of living adjustment, or COLA, to restore purchasing power to an 85% minimum level effective July 1, 2022. As you all know, high levels of recent inflation have not only impacted current UC employees, but of course our retirees. UCRP provides annuitants with an annual COLA based on a formula that is generally tied to increases in the Consumer Price Index. The annual COLA provides some protection against annuitant purchasing power being eroded over time. However, based on that formula, in a year where CPI is greater than 2%, we do see decreases in annuitants purchasing power. This is especially the case in the most recent year, where inflation in California has been over 6%, and most annuitants will receive a 3.7% COLA this year. So we have approximately 900 annuitants who now have retained purchasing power under 75%, and a total of 4,800 annuitants who are under the 85% purchasing power level. And these are annuitants that retired on or before July 1 of 1991. Historically, the Regents have striven to protect purchasing power from being significantly eroded by inflation. This has occurred through the Regents' adoption of ad hoc COLAs that have restored annuitants' purchasing power to at least 75% and in some cases 85% over the years. The most recent ad hoc COLA was adopted in 2001 by this board, and it restored purchasing power to the 85% level. So it's been successful for the last 21 years in maintaining that purchasing power. The President recommends that UCRP be amended for an ad hoc COLA that restores annuitant purchasing power to 85% effective July 1. The Regents Consulting Pension Actuary Siegel has confirmed that if adopted, the ad hoc COLA would not materially alter the funding status of UCRP. The ad hoc COLA would increase the actuarial accrued liability by $32.6 million, which represents a 0.03% impact on the last evaluation. The ad hoc COLA would decrease UCRP's funded ratio by that same percentage, 0.03%. Maybe I'll stop there, and we'd be happy to take any questions, Chair.
Great. Regent Perez.
So help me understand what universe of our retirees are annuitants versus receiving other types of retirement benefits?
Well, all of these would be receiving UCRP, and all of them, because we're after a certain age, would also get Social Security. So,
but this isn't a subset of our employees who get UC pensions. It's
no, they're all part of the pre. So it's the 86 tier of the pension.
So how do I then align that? I'm not opposed to what's before us, but I'm trying to get some consistency here in the way I look at this question. So how do I align my thinking with respect to protecting purchasing power here with what we did in subsequent tiers and the risk that we have shifted to employees who have been shifted over to defined contribution instead of defined benefit. And if those folks had retired in the last several months, would have taken a much more significant hit to the purchasing power of their retirement. So how do I make sure that we're being consistent from a values perspective? And what, if anything, should we take from this in terms of how we should look at what we've done with respect to defined contribution instead of a defined benefit in the last tier?
The inflation measurement on any of the defined benefit tiers would be exactly the same. It has this strange donut hole where the first 2%, go into the COLA, and then there's a hole, and then above that it's measured. So that's why on a 6% inflation rate you get a 375 increase. That's the same whether it's on the historic tier, the 13 tier, or the 16 tier. You're absolutely right for DC. If someone chose the DC plan and then they retired, they would they would have suffered the 20% reduction in the stock market. But that again, it is a opt-out choice to go to DC.
It's an opt-out of choice, and look, I'll say this and then I'll stop. It's an opt-out of choice. Some of us saw this coming, raised concerns about this exact situation at the time that we did it, and then we've anecdotally heard that the onboarding has caused a higher percentage of folks to take that option than anticipated. And although I had requested us revisiting this, we never have. So I'll leave it at that.
And if I could just, I appreciate Regent Perez's comments, just adding some additional concerns that spending $33 million in a pension fund that is not fully funded, the timing is awfully curious. I know you're trying to align with the regular cost of living, but we're at some point soon, Jadip's going to announce some very poor performance for the last fiscal year, and our pension fund is going to be significantly less funded than we thought it was, say, a year ago. And so I appreciate this is a relatively small group of individuals at a low cost, but I am bothered by the notion of giving increased benefits when we haven't even put aside the funding to actually meet all of our obligations before we start offering increased benefits. So I don't know if others have...
I mean, I would just offer a couple of notes on that. One is, we had looked, and there had been pressure to look at going into 90%. That would have been a $200+ million addition, and we chose to keep it at 85% because it is basically 0.03% of the overall liability. I understand your concern, and I share the concern. I just think for this group of retirees, given their age and given how long they've been in the system, I think it's the right and the fair thing to do without that significant cost.
Let me go to Regent Lieb, and then I'll have some further comments. Regent Lieb.
So I'm also, I'm not necessarily opposing it. I'm just curious. I read it. I don't quite understand, sort of why this group versus others. This is a small group. Has this group been the most egregiously, I don't know how to even describe it, but they've been hurt the most, and that's why we're trying to do it for this group? And what would not bring you back next time with, more groups with these kinds of things? I don't know. I'm just a little concerned about, it's a fairly small group that we're talking about, so I'm just trying to figure out.
Yeah, Charlie, this is the only group that has fallen below 85% of the purchasing power when when you retire, think of yourself as 100%. If the COLA keeps up with inflation, you're always at 100%. When COLA does not keep up with inflation, that's when your purchasing power starts to erode. Because these folks retired over 30 years ago, they are the only ones that have fallen below an 85% funding level. And as you can see, some of them actually have fallen below 75%. So that's why it's a small number, and for several of them, it doesn't take that much to get them back to 85% purchasing power.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Okay. Forgive me, I need help with the math. I get it. At time of retirement, whatever that is considered 100%. But what 100% means for population A versus population B varies, right? So depending on which tier you were in when you accrued and when you retired, what 100% means is substantially different. And so what I'm trying to get at is what the relative value of 100% is for different populations based on tier. If there wasn't a distinction, we wouldn't have made the adjustments to tiers. And the cost of living impacts for folks in later tiers in some ways are greater, depending on certain variables that they have less control of, like housing. I'm not going to oppose the item before us, but it raises a whole lot more questions for me with respect to what level of retirement security we feel that we have an obligation for our employees, and whether or not this is the right time to look at our DB versus DC decisions in the past. Because my fear has always been that, especially for the lowest compensated employees, migrating an increased percentage of them to DC creates greater risk at time of retirement. When the state looked at this during the Pepper discussions, one of the things that informed the state is if you put somebody into a greater degree of need, then you may not be paying on the pension side, but you're paying on social services. We don't have that same direct impact, but I think we ought to be informed by it. And so I'm going to be supportive of this item, but I'd like us to have that broader conversation.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely appropriate because, I mean, you're absolutely correct. If you retired, the same circumstances if you were in the 13 tier as a 16 tier, and you were affected by the Pepper cap, you could be at half of the income. So even though the inflation, the purchasing power math is identical, you're starting from a base that's 50% less.
And just to make this more complicated, you're going to start having retirees who went through years where they either weren't contributing to their pension at all compared to today's workers who are. Plus, UC over those years in the early 90s was putting additional funding into the cap funds. And so I would say if this issue comes back and if we're entering a higher inflation environment, I expect it will, I would want to see analysis of the individual incomes as well as the caps. You can't just separate the pension and say, oh, their pensions are only
exactly.
80% of what they retired. If you're going to ignore, they're sitting on, in some cases, fairly large, the equivalent of 401k accounts.
That were funded by the university.
That were funded by the university, exactly.
Yeah,
So I'm with Regent Perez. I'm not thrilled on this, but I'm not going to stand in the way. But I would say the next time, and hopefully the minutes will reflect this, next time an item like this comes forward, one, to have a more full analysis of who actually would be served by any ad hoc COLA adjustment, as well as sort of keeping the cost sort of where you've had it, where it's relatively minor. And that may mean that we're not able to maintain 85% on a long-term basis. We're in a very different world than the last 5 times this has been discussed, where we don't have a fully funded pension system, which folks need to be concerned about. That we've made that ironclad obligation to our workers. We need to be able to know that we've met the obligation that they've earned before we start providing greater benefits to some of the retirees.
Okay, can I make move the motion? Move the item?
Please.
Sorry.